Welcome to the ResumeX podcast. Today, we're talking about a hidden cost that most organizations accept as inevitable: the trust tax. My guest is Vinayak Joglekar, who argues that AI, smart contracts, and temporary DAOs can radically reduce this tax. Vinayak, let's start at the beginning. When you talk about a trust tax, what does that actually mean in practical terms?
The trust tax is the cost organizations incur not to create value, but to protect themselves from uncertainty and potential failure. It shows up as legal fees, audits, due diligence, compliance, approvals, mechanisms designed to compensate for low trust. A very concrete example comes from a merger my company was involved in. Before we even knew whether the merger would happen or whether it would deliver the desired outcomes, both companies spent close to $1 million each on due diligence and legal fees. All that money was spent before any real collaboration began. We weren't buying value, we were buying protection against uncertainty. And even after spending it, there was no guarantee of success. That's the trust tax: large, irreversible investments made up front to reduce fear without actually learning whether collaboration will work.
Your paper argues that trust hasn't disappeared. It's become economically constrained. What changed?
Historically, trust worked because institutions were stable and relationships were long lived. But in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, assumptions expire quickly. Organizations still want to trust, but they are unwilling to absorb large, irreversible losses. So instead of trusting people or partners, they trust controls, contracts, and processes, and that's where the cost explodes.
And paradoxically, all that effort doesn't guarantee better outcomes.
Exactly. The paper shows that heavy trust spending correlates poorly with collaboration success. You can spend millions on diligence and still discover misalignment only after real work begins.
You're quite critical of traditional contracts. What's the core problem with them?
Contracts encode assumptions about the future. Lawyers do their job well. They anticipate edge cases and lock down risk. But in fast changing environments, overspecification makes adaptation expensive. The contract often outlives the reality it was written for, turning safety mechanisms into constraints.
So the issue isn't contracts themselves, it's long lived, rigid contracts.
Exactly, permanence becomes the risk.
Why do organizations respond to low trust by adding more controls and processes?
Because fear scales faster than learning. When trust is low, organizations default to mechanisms they already understand: audits, contracts, approvals, even if those mechanisms are misaligned with how work actually happens. A recent example illustrates this well. We were considering a partnership with a top audit and management consulting firm to audit smart contracts. Some prospects were cautious about stablecoin based transactions, so the idea was to use a trusted brand to increase confidence. The firm had deep expertise in smart contracts, but their approach resembled annual financial audits. They were expensive, took weeks or months, and cost thousands of dollars per engagement. That was a showstopper for us. Our model relied on hundreds of small, fast, low value smart contracts. Applying heavyweight audits to each contract destroyed the economics. The audit itself became more expensive than the risk it was meant to mitigate.
You're critical of long term commitments made under uncertain assumptions. Can you give a broader example?
A large scale example played out during and after COVID 19. Companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Meta hired tens of thousands of engineers based on assumptions about sustained growth. Those assumptions changed quickly, especially with the rise of AI centric workflows. What followed were massive layoffs. Think about the trust tax here: recruitment pipelines, background checks, onboarding, equipment, employment contracts, all of it done upfront. In many cases, little or no value was realized before the relationships were unwound. This wasn't a failure of people, it was a failure of long lived commitments made in a volatile environment.
A big idea in the paper is bounded contexts. Why are they so important?
Because value is no longer created in long linear value streams, it's created locally in discovery efforts, pilots, prototypes, market tests, each with different risks and lifespans. Bounded contexts give us clear scope, explicit assumptions, defined entry and exit, cheap failure, Smart contracts and DAOs fit naturally at this level of granularity.
So instead of trusting a partner forever, we trust them for this one bounded context.
Exactly, and only for as long as it makes sense.
Let's shift to solutions. You say smart contracts don't create trust, they change its cost. What does that look like in the real world?
A great example involved a startup founder in Boston who wanted to build an e commerce app with freelancers in India. Both sides were stuck. The founder was betting their life savings and didn't want to pay up front. The freelancers didn't want to work without assurance of payment. Smart contracts broke the deadlock. Payment was tied directly to outcomes. Software meeting predefined acceptance criteria and passing automated tests. Once the tests passed, payment was triggered digitally with no human intervention, no promises, no persuasion. Execution itself became the proof.
Once they agreed to use smart contracts, how did they actually begin?
They didn't know where to start, so we deliberately made the scope tiny. We identified one user story that could be built, tested, and delivered in 1 week. That story was converted into two smart contracts, one for the tester to write automated test cases, one for the developer to write code that would pass those tests. Everything was digitally verifiable. Within 48 hours, this group, separated by thousands of miles and time zones, had successfully collaborated and was ready to take on more work. Trust emerged from fast, observable execution.
If you had to summarize the shift you're proposing, what would it be?
Move from buying trust upfront to testing trust through execution. Instead of asking, can we trust them for 5 years? Ask, can we safely test collaboration for 90 days with clear outcomes and automatic exit?
That's a powerful reframe.
Trust becomes an emergent property of behavior, not a prerequisite assumption.
How does this thinking apply at the organizational level, say, after a merger?
Post M&A, synergies often fail because of cultural mistrust and fear of layoffs. People hesitate to collaborate deeply. Instead of forcing full integration, we propose forming a DAO bound by scope and time. The DAO includes members from both companies and exists only to test one question: can this combined team deliver outcomes better, faster, or cheaper than either company alone? Incentives are tied to outcome based smart contracts. If synergy exists, you have execution evidence. If not, the DAO dissolves cleanly without dragging the whole organization through a painful integration.
DAOs have a reputation for failing. Why?
Many DAOs were modeled like traditional companies: multiple objectives, long term goals, permanent governance. That complexity required specialist solidity programmers, and intent was often misinterpreted in code. Unmet expectations followed, and the DAO model itself was written off. But DAOs work extremely well when limited to a bounded context, clear objective, digitally verifiable outcomes, lifespan measured in weeks. In that form, DAOs stop being fragile organizations and become robust execution mechanisms.
AI plays a central role in your model. What makes AI special here?
AI is incentive neutral. It doesn't fear blame, chase bonuses, or protect reputation. Its role is not intelligence, it's translation. Humans define intent and outcomes. AI translates that intent into executable rules, smart contracts, governance logic, constraints, and expiry conditions.
So, AI makes contracts cheap enough to experiment with?
Exactly. When contracts are cheap, small, and disposable, organizations can run many low risk experiments instead of betting everything on one big agreement.
If you had to summarize the shift you're proposing, what would it be?
Move from buying trust upfront to testing trust through execution. In a volatile world, safety doesn't come from permanence, it comes from reversibility, observability, and cheap exit. AI and smart contracts don't eliminate risk, they make risk cheap enough to learn from.
Final question. What should leaders unlearn to reduce the trust tax?
They need to unlearn the idea that safety comes from permanence. In a VUCA world, safety comes from reversibility, observability, and fast exit. AI and smart contracts don't eliminate risk, but they make risk cheap, visible, and survivable.
Vinayak, thank you. This was a powerful reframe of trust and collaboration.
Thank you, Aria. It was a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this discussion, follow us for more conversations on how artificial intelligence is reshaping the future of technology and business. Until next time, I'm Aria, and this was the ResumeX podcast.